So in this box we've got about 20 or so lures. We're going to pick the top 10. These are lures that I wouldn't be without, so I've really thought about this year. There's stuff in there if I didn't have, wouldn't feel right. So first on the list is going to be the IMA KOMOMO. We've used it in various guises, did really well for us last year. It's also caught our first, albeit schooly, fish of this year. Comes in different types. We're actually going to go for the KOMOMO 2. I do want that KOMOMO 2 in my tackle box if I'm only choosing 10 lures. Obsessed with the first version of this. This is the second version of it. It's really sleek. Got the rattle, this one's good to go. So the KOMOMO 2, another floating lure, but this should do the business as well. I've just got a lot of confidence with it in and around the boulders. It's just a subsurface lure, literally an inch or two underneath the surface. You can have a steady retrieve and it'll just won't even break surface, but won't go much deeper than about a foot. A lot of the time when those fish are taking the fish off the surface, they'll take a KOMOMO as well. Next up we've got the dual-tied minnow. This is a bit of an oddity in this list and we'll come on to why in a moment. And get this dual-tied minnow to cast further than any of the lures on the list too. Flies like an absolute dart. Further than the Patchinko, further than the Zonk. This is the slim version, and then this one could pass as a little mackerel, Joey mackerel. Look at it, brilliant. It's got the silver on the flanks there. Bright condition lure, this one. Again, another floating one. Now the reason this one's in here is because of you, and this one kept coming up again and again in the poll. So this one's down to you guys. I haven't caught on it yet, but we'll give this a good go this season, and then I can thank you if I catch on it. The sort of lure that I think I'll use to get the fish sort of entice a bite, dying bait fish, a bait fish in trouble sort of thing going on. It doesn't swim very naturally, but it does have a very tight rolling action. This is a 120, and I'm guessing this is going to perform quite well in rough conditions as well. Get the fish to notice subsurface. So thanks very much for suggesting it. We've got a load of soft plastic, and I want one soft plastic in this top 10. There's a few that I use quite a lot. You can see here lots of different examples you can use. Most of the time these are going to be used weedless and weightless as well. Some of these friends have made. Basically got these Senkos, the Gary Yamamoto Senkos, they're quite good. We've got the Sluggo, which we'll come on to in a minute, and of course the dolive stick in there as well. If you want to know how to rig some of these, we did a little video just here top right. So the Sluggo, I think it's really just like a sand eel, an injured sand eel. So it all depends on the tide, pull of the tide, as to how you fish it. All I'm doing here, staying in contact with it. Got the tide coming towards us here actually. Just don't want too much slack in the line. You'll see as it comes through the sort of action. So we've looked at the Sluggo, we looked at various soft plastics, but the one I'm going to stick with, old and battered it may be, but the dolive sticks are the one to go with, I think. Nice and easy to cast. You can have it weighted on the hook if you want. You can see the sort of rocks and stuff in front of us. So we give the Sluggo a go. Less likely to get snagged in there. Bright day and it's a nice bright lure. So that is definitely in the top 10. You recognise this one? It's the fish black minnow. Still probably the best weighted shad that I've used. Does have a few bad points. It's so soft, that silicone. I'll have a few of these in the tackle box. I really like the small ones, these lighter ones here. But I'll leave the details of this underneath. Really simple. We've looked at it so many times in the channel. But if you need a little shad or sand eel imitation, the black minnow is the way to go. The hooks are really super sharp, work really well. Release well on that latch system. We did actually look at how to tie that up there, but that's it. My only criticism of these, of course, is once they've been hit a few times, you end up super gluing bits back together. Lots of cheaper alternatives, but they're still the best, and I'm going to put the black minnow in there. Next up is another obvious one. We featured it before, the Patchinko 120s. Actually marked it as a Patchinko 2, simply because of how well the Patchinko casts. Right, also in the pouring rain, the Patchinko, it casts really well. Got the rattles, hooks are super sharp, as you can see. It's just that little bit better than the Axia version of it. Casts that a little bit further, and that's the weight of it. Great, really good. It's very often the first lure that I'd use out of the box, just to see if there's any fish around at distance and close in. Different ways of retrieving that Patchinko. Here you can see we're running across this little gap between two reefs. You can probably see some of the rocks underneath as well, midway across. And leave it, see which way the water's flowing, and then bring it in. Nice straight slow retrieve, or you can thrash it across the top as well. No surprises for this one, Patchinko. Of course, it does something different as well, which is that'll sit around on the surface of the water, can be moved around, and so many times I've had bass come up and take it. I've never had a really big bass on this. 4 pounds is the biggest I've had, but I really trust it. I've seen it happen. The bass will smash this off the surface. So the spitting wire definitely gets a mention. Now just imagine what that would be like if a bass came up and took it right there. I hope to get that one day on the channel. But really it does need a lot of aerated water, I think. Surf crashing around, that's where they work their best. It wouldn't feel complete without the spitting wire in this list, so the spitting wire gets it. Bit of an honourable mention. Those spitting wires are so hard to get hold of, so I've got what I thought would be something very similar. This is the bent minnow. It's got that sort of joker colour, but if you look at it's got that sort of cotton candy colour, hasn't it? But if you look at the way the hook is there, you can see it sits like a dead fish, a bent fish. When the bass will chase the shoals right up the shingle, this will be the one to go for. I did want to say a few words about treble hooks. You'll notice some of these lures that we're using have got single hooks, some have got barbs on, some have got a set of 3 trebles on. One option is, of course, to take the treble hooks off and put singles on, and I've done that with some of the lures, not all of them yet. We did a fair amount last year. You will see a mixture of some trebles on. You can always crush the barbs as well, that's another option. It means that the 3rd hook or the 2nd hook doesn't damage the fish as much. But when the water's flowing really well, I think you can get away with treble hooks. But ideally, I'd say 1 in 5 or 6 fish, you'd benefit from a single hook, although you miss more fish. Number 4 is the Zuri crystal minnow. If you can get the really small one, I've always had success. Again, another one we featured before, has to go on here. I got a lot of early season fish on it last year. Real simple, lightweight lure, the Zuri crystal mid-price, mid-range lure that catches bass. So I did want to mention just some honourable mentions. These are ones that didn't quite make it into the list. There's a new range of lures from Longin. These are quite good. These are big surface lures, over 30 grams. And I had been looking for something like this. Really big, chunky surface lures that the bass will see from quite a way off, I'd imagine. Quality on these is excellent. There's something else to check out on. There's the Frankie there. Pirate lures as well, another cheaper alternative, single hooks, weighted there on the shank. So the Rapala J13, the traditional old-fashioned lure that in many ways started it all on this south coast. I keep saying the J13, there's also the J11. These are really old-fashioned by today's standards, clunky casting. Won't cast anywhere as near as some of these modern Japanese lures. I do like them in natural colours. You can see here we got blue. And these just give me something a little bit different in that you can get them to dig down, retrieve faster. You can get them down to about 5 foot with the braid. So if you're going past an obstruction, dig down into the lure, fast retrieve, bit of tip action, and it'll bring the lure down deep. And then if you're coming up to like a shallow reef, just let go, the lure floats to the surface. So I know we've used this one before, but it's still going to be in there. I catch fish every year on this. I have done for 30 years. So it's a top lure, and a little bit of lure fishing history really. So a little bit sentimental with it. I caught my first lure caught bass on this as well. Although I have lost a fair few over the years. Savage Gear Seeker, I know a lot of people like these. It's a metal, but it doesn't just sink. It'll flutter around quite a bit because it's got that sort of profile. I've always got something like that in there. There's the Savage Gear one, unbranded one. So it's always worth, although we're looking at mostly hard plastics here or plugs, always handy to have something like this. Don't tend to get the bigger fish, but this could easily outwit a bass. I've only had small bass on this though, but these seem to be probably the best made of the hard metals of that sort of thing. So before we come on to number one, I know some of you are anticipating what it is. What are your favourites? Have a little think and put it in the description. What are we missing? I think I've given us as best chance as possible, particularly from these sort of waters, to catch bass on lures. But there'll always be something that someone else will want. Of course you can catch bass on pretty much everything, but I've got every faith in these lures, and I urge you to at least give one of them a try, see how you get on. I'd love to know. There are budget alternatives, and we're going to come on to look at that as well. Lures that look very similar, fish similarly, but cost less than half of the lures here. Thanks very much for watching. Don't normally say this, but do subscribe to the channel. I'd love to get to 20,000, then we're going to give away a top lure rod to anyone that regularly comments on the channel. It's very hot. This is the 120 Megabass Zonk. Absolutely flies as a lure, really good quality. I was taking a bit of a batter in this one, just with a few casts, but this sinks, just drops down like that, and it works quite well in the surf zone, not on a flat calm day like today. I'll show you in the water. And it's really hard to explain how to retrieve a lure because it all depends on how much flow of water there is, if you're in a current or not. So I'm just in touch with this, just keeping it. You see the tip of the rod there? Just enough to stay in touch with that lure. Right, so I've cast that out. What I've got to be careful of now, it's dropping down onto the reef. For a 25-pound lure, I don't want to lose it. So you've just got to bring that up a little bit now. Stay in contact with it. And the idea is I'm not trying to race it through the water. This is a dying bait fish, that zonk. I want to keep in contact with it and try and keep it as light as possible. While I'm doing this, I'm trying to keep an eye on the gulls as well, because they'll know where the hunting bass are. Small pockets of mackerel just popping up here. Generally when the gulls are really high, it tends to be a bass shoal. When they're low and they're on the actual surface of the water, that's the mackerel, because the mackerel will have hit the sand eel and they're all on the surface. It's just giving enough on this reel like this. So once again, the zonk's sort of top of the tree for me. Although these lures weren't really in any particular order, I hope each of them offer something slightly different for us as bass anglers. But do comment, please do subscribe, and we've got some bass catching action coming up on the channel too. So thanks very much for watching.